Welcome to our September wrap-up. We are fully embracing the fall vibes this month. As you can see, I have a little candle burning. I have a comfy little fall time sweater on, and let's just dive right in. I read a total of, I don't even know how many books I read. That would be a great thing to have. I read a total of 8 books this month. I'm gonna pop up some stats on here so you can really see what I read. I had a really good reading month. I read all but one book that was on my September TBR. So I feel very accomplished because I was basically able to finish my complete September TBR. The first book was Butcher and Blackbird by Bryn Weaver. I ended up rating this book 3.75 stars, which is a great rating. If you ever hear me say anything that's a 3.5 and above, I would recommend, and I still had a really good time reading it. Initially, I actually rated this 4 stars, but then upon reflection, I bumped it down just a little bit because when compared to other 4-star reads that I had later in the month, it just didn't really feel like it was on the same level. This is about Sloane and Rowan, and they are both serial killers who murder people, obviously, and it is a romance, so of course they end up having a sort of relationship, and it sounds pretty outrageous. They're basically serial killers who are in a relationship who kill bad guys. That's what I really liked about this book and found unique, was that in my head it just kind of sounds like something that would be fun to read and would be totally outrageous, fun to make up, and that's basically the product. The beginning to it was also giving you vibes. If you have seen that show, then you kind of know what I'm talking about. It's very kind of stalkerish and a little bit creepy, a little bit unsettling. The actual banter was really funny. These characters were hilarious. It still felt very kind of lighthearted, even though obviously there's like gruesome topics being talked about. It was still on a lighter level. I also really enjoyed the fact that this book takes place over a long period of time, but we kind of time jump from chapter to chapter. Like after the first chapter ends, we're like 4 weeks down the line starting the next chapter. So I thought that was really interesting and actually really kept me intrigued and compelled to finish reading it. For the romance aspect, I feel like their relationship really rolled out quick, but it was still believable. I still found myself kind of cheering them on. I will say it is very, very smutty and spicy, so if you're not a fan of that, then you probably won't like this book. I already bought the second book because it is part of a trilogy, and the second book is called Leather and Lark, and those characters do come out in this book, so you kind of get a little bit of a glimpse, and I'm very excited to start that book. Book 2 was actually the one audiobook that I listened to, and it was Sociopath. This is a memoir. This is about her life navigating her sociopathy. So it literally begins as she's a little girl trying to explain how her upbringing and childhood were like, especially with the different like symptoms she was experiencing and just the differences between her and a normal child, someone who wouldn't have that same diagnosis. Of course, she doesn't get diagnosed till later on in her adult life, but I just thought it was really fascinating to read literally her entire life and how she felt during each stage of her life with family, relationships, work. One thing that I found really relatable about this author was her love of education, and especially with sociopathy, there really isn't a lot out there. There just isn't too much information, so she took it upon herself to literally become a doctorate of, I believe, sociology, or not sociology, sociopathy, and she is gonna do the work herself since nobody else has done it. So I found that really interesting. Also, just the topic of sociopathy is intriguing to me because I am a criminal justice major, and I just remember in high school I actually wrote an essay about a serial killer, and he was diagnosed with sociopathy. So I did do like minimal research back then to see what that disorder is like and how those symptoms could cause a life of crime or just kind of predispose you a bit more than the average individual. I feel like I learned a lot. It was very educational, as most memoirs are, but I love that about them. I love reading about someone's story, but also learning about whatever it is that they're talking about, in this instance being sociopathy. Next book that I read was a thriller mystery, and it is called Little Secrets by Jennifer Hillier. I actually borrowed this from my library, so I have to go return it literally after this video. I have read this author before, and she wrote Jar of Hearts, which I found that book really, really good. It's another thriller mystery that I definitely recommend. This one is a lot less gruesome, graphic than Jar of Hearts, so if you're a little scared of jumping into that one, I definitely recommend this one. I rated this 4.5 stars. This is about Marin, who's an adult. She has a husband and she has a son named Sebastian, and this takes place in Seattle, and it's kind of around the holidays, and she's at like a Christmas market with her son, and she has to take a quick phone call and like kind of step away from him, and the second she comes back, he's gone. Sebastian is like a little boy under 10 years old, and he got kidnapped. Obviously she freaks out. They file a police report. Her and her husband are actually very wealthy, and they do face a lot of criticisms because of that, because there's just a lot of resources and money being poured into this investigation that quite frankly like other people wouldn't have if they weren't the status of Marin and her husband. But in this book there are themes of infidelity, there's themes of grief, themes of kidnap. So definitely check your trigger warnings, but besides that, I just thought that the actual plot was super complex. I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, so much so that the last 30% I could not put this book down. I had to know what happened. The entire time too, the author kind of allows you to create your own narrative in your head, and you're kind of guessing the plot twist, you're kind of guessing the secrets, and that just makes for a really fun time reading a book. I absolutely would recommend. I was entertained the entire time. The payoff, the plot twists are so worth it, and I just remember once I finished it, I was like, this is kind of one of those top tier thriller mystery books that you actually feel like a real plot and a real story are taking place, plus all the like haunting, unnerving aspects that you look for in a thriller mystery. So definitely for spooky season, I definitely recommend this book. Next up is Heartless by Elsie Silver. This is book 2 in the Chestnut Springs series. This is about Willa and Cade. This is a romance book, but it is a single dad trope with the nanny. They obviously kind of become more than just that work relationship, but it's very interesting reading them trying to navigate that. Cade has a lot of trauma that he deals with. He has a son, of course, and his ex-wife basically used him to impregnate her and then just left. So he has a lot of trauma, and in this book you really kind of delve into that and kind of experience that with him. While I was reading it, I feel like I wasn't super invested. I just felt like I was kind of bored. It felt kind of basic in terms of the romance. I feel like I had read this 100 times before. Looking back, I ended up rating it 4 stars, so obviously I think it was decent. It was really good. I very much enjoyed it. I did find those kind of more emotional, sentimental moments between our two characters. If you have read this book, then Willa getting sick, and then at the very end of the book there's like a sidewalk scene. Those are the moments where I'm like, wait a minute, I do believe in this relationship. I do believe in this love between these characters. So I would definitely recommend this book, and it is pretty spicy. I think all of Chestnut Springs is pretty spicy. This one I feel like it was more than the first one. And then in comparison to Flawless, the first book in the series, I would say I enjoyed this one more. But I am super excited for the next few books in the series, because it's such a found family aspect that you get aspects of different characters who have their own books down the line. And the next book is about Sloane and Jasper, which Sloane I guess is the most popular romance book female character name, because the amount of books that I read with the female character named is Sloane. Anyway, I cannot wait for that book. Winter's book is going to wreck me, so very, very excited for the series as a whole. Very excited for book 5. It was Final Offer by Lauren Asher. I need a moment with this book because I rated this book 5 stars, and I feel like I was so surprised at my rating. I did not expect this to be a 5-star read. First of all, I'm a big fan of Lauren Asher, but I feel like her romances sometimes are really, really long. This is part of the Dreamland Billionaire series. It's book 3, the final book. The first 2 books I enjoyed. They were probably 3.5, 4-star books, so they were good. They weren't anything crazy to me, and this book is super highly rated, very, very popular, so of course I wanted to finish it. And this book is the biggest out of all 3 books. Does a contemporary romance book have to be this big? Not necessarily, in my opinion. That's what I thought before going into this book. After reading this book, I think the length was perfect, which is super surprising to me, maybe to some of you guys. This is the story of Alana and Kane, Kane being the youngest of the billionaire brothers. And if you don't know what this series is about, basically they're 3 brothers and their grandfather passed away, and he left sort of different steps and procedures that each brother has to take and do in order for them to gain their inheritance. So obviously book 1 and 2 are the 2 other brothers. This this is the third brother, Kane, and his has to do with a lake house, or like a house on the lake in Wisteria Lake that he co-owns with our female main character, Alana. In his grandpa's will, he has to sell the house, but Alana has to agree to it. Alana grew up in this home. This is her childhood home. She now has her own daughter that she's taking care of and wants to live in this house with her. So she's obviously very much against it. But of course, we kind of flesh out those details. That's kind of the basic synopsis. I will say the first 30-40 pages of this book teach you a lot. You learn a lot, which I was not expecting. Again, I kind of thought it would kind of start off slow, but you start off pretty fast and you kind of already get the gist of what the book is going to be about in the first 30 pages. So that's always a big plus. And the romance itself, I thought was beautiful. It was one of those ones where you really feel the connection between these two characters. Favorite couple from this series by far. The main character, Alana, our female character, she is Latina, she's Colombian, so obviously that's extra perks, extra points on my behalf because I am Latina and I love to see that representation in mainstream romance novels. There's great tension in this book. The forced proximity is eating. They have to live together in this house for a period of time and you really get to see them like fight it out, see the tension building. I will say I also saw so much self-growth in Cal, our male main character. He suffers from substance abuse. There's depth to these characters, so there's not depth only in the romance but also in the individual characters themselves. So that's why I said I think the length is perfect because you really get a backstory on each of our individual characters and them as a whole. So again, absolutely recommend, 5-star read. Next book that I read was Daisy Hates the Great Undoing by Jessa Hastings. This book was a 5-star prediction for me. I ended up rating it 4.25 stars. More on that in a minute. This is book 3 in the Magnolia Parks universe. This is the second Daisy Hates book, and the first Daisy Hates book I rated 5 stars, so obviously I had super high expectations for this book. Daisy Hates is my favorite book character of all time. I think definitely top 3, if not my favorite. I just love her so much. She's so vulnerable, she has depth, she has the intelligence. I just love her. She's such a well fleshed out, well-rounded character. In my opinion, this book just didn't have enough Daisy. There's a lot of side characters at this point in the story, and obviously their story gets a big spotlight, but I just wish we had more of Daisy and Christian as well. I feel like it literally wasn't until halfway through the book where we even get like I don't even know the word, a sprinkle of Daisy and Christian like together, and it's kind of, I mean, you're waiting for it the entire book, you really are. And I just feel like there wasn't enough of them in the very end, honestly. I feel like it finishes pretty abruptly, but I get that, it's part of a series. I have the next book on my shelf, so obviously I can just pick it up and continue. But I also feel like with me saying there isn't enough Daisy Christian in this book, I feel like a lot of what we go through and read about in this book we already read in Magnolia Parks The Long Way Home. I get it's from a different POV, but I honestly still feel like some of these scenes were the exact same that I read in the other book. So again, it just felt sort of repetitive a little bit, and I just didn't get enough of the characters that I wanted to read about. Even The Great Undoing, I don't even think is really about Daisy Hates. I don't want to go into it more because I don't want to spoil the book, and I still am going to continue the series and finish it off at least with what's out for now, which is the next Magnolia Parks book. Next book that I read was Addicted After All by Kristen Becca Ritchie. This is part of the Addicted series. At this point, I'm pretty far into the series. I only have maybe 3 books left out of a whole 10-book series, so definitely doing my due diligence with this series. This book in general, I ended up rating it 4 stars. I thought it was solid. What stood out to me the most in this book was just the growth of both of our main characters, Lily and Lo. Their growth is immense in this book. I was so proud of these 2 fictional characters that I've never even met. It's not my favorite book in the series, but I do think it was still very solid. Towards the end of the book especially, there's like a big event that you really look forward to all series, and it was very heartwarming. It did its job. I am ready to read the next book, but I'm also a little scared that I just don't want to not like any book in this series, so I am going to take a break for at least this next month and not read another Addicted series book. I'm hoping still to finish by the end of the year. There are 3 books left, so who knows, but I am gonna take a little bit of a break just because I don't want to burn myself out, and sometimes I feel like especially the last like 50-40 pages are I'm like dragging myself through, and honestly they're not even like part of the actual book, they're just like bonus content, but I want to read it because obviously I love these characters, but by that point I'm just like so tired. So I don't know, I'm just gonna take a little bit of a break so I don't feel that way and I don't like burn out. The 8th and final book that I read in this month was The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. I cannot believe I am saying that because I bought this book over 2 years ago probably. It's one of the first OG book talk books that I ever bought. Was really excited to read, but I just never ever picked it up. I think as time went on, I got really intimidated, one, by the super high ratings of this book, and two, it's a fantasy book, and I'm not super immersed in that genre. So I feel like it did intimidate me a little bit. In my opinion, I felt like the book was going to be intimidating and a little bit hard to follow, hard to read, because some fantasies are. But I will say that this book was the opposite. Let me just tell you my rating. I rated this book 3.75 stars. Again, it is a 3-star, like 3.75 star rating, but it is still really good. I do recommend it. Please don't get stuck on the rating. I know it is super highly rated and so many people love this. It's a 5-star read, and that's perfectly fine. It just wasn't for me. I will say I was super intimidated going into this book, but even just the first like 20-30 pages, I felt like it was really easy to follow. So that was super kind of relieving for me because that was kind of something that was putting me off, but it was really easy to follow. The storytelling is absolutely beautiful. V.E. Schwab, I've never read one of their books before, and it was their storytelling and just the prose, the way they write is so beautiful and magical. If you want a book that will give you 100 million quotes to highlight, this is the book for you. Every single page there's a memorable quote, and maybe that's why this book is so highly rated. Now for the plot itself, it's a very interesting plot. It's about Addie LaRue, and she makes a wish with the god of like the dark or something about wanting to live many different lives. Like she just gets kind of bored. She doesn't want her one life living in this small town in France. She wants to experience the world and everything and everyone. And so she makes a wish. Obviously it doesn't intend to really work out the way she initially wished, and we just sort of follow her story. If you have watched The Age of Adeline, I believe that's what the movie is called, it's very similar to this book and it definitely gives those vibes. Even the freaking name is the same. So I definitely recommend watching that movie. If you love this book and if you love that movie, definitely read this book. It's a very intriguing, compelling plot, but I feel like the whole time I was reading it, I was kind of waiting for more and expecting more. Even the end, like the payoff, I just kind of read it, absorbed it, and was like, okay, cool. Like that was a cool way to end it, but I wasn't shocked, I wasn't breathless, I wasn't super surprised, and it didn't have like a lasting or even like in the moment hitting effect on me. Yeah, those are just my thoughts on The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Very glad I finally read it though. Those are all the books that I read in September. Thank you guys so much for watching. I already have my October TBR and we are already starting it, so stay tuned. But for now, that is it. Thank you. Bye.